All right, so we are going to be asking you to change seats. We'll do this in two parts. We'll have people gather. I'll show you in a moment which tables are going to be where. We'll have people change, go to that table 1 through 7. We'll ask there be a facilitator at each group with a laptop that's opened up to the Google Drive folder for the conference, and in there's a folder called Discussion with a Google document by table. And we're going to ask you to collect your thoughts and have a scribe at each table. So when you're moving there, that's the first thing we need to do is get organized, find someone with Wi-Fi access that can find Claudia's email with the link and can find the discussion folder with that document that we're going to collect from. We are going to have you talk at your table, and there will be a reporting out period, so everyone gets to hear the discussions that went on at other tables. So that's where we're going next. All right, so these are written up in quite a bit of detail. So let me kind of go over what we're doing here. So these are a combination of the discussion topics that we've already had, some questions people had from the pre-survey. And so table 1 is looking at departmental structure, review of programs, how to organize and evaluate things at a programmatic level. Programmatic directors, do we need internal extra review, post rubrics, that kind of stuff. Number 2 is working with Jenny directly on actually like how do students learn core concepts. So this is more of a how do students make mental models, like how do you actually work with students to do this. Table 3 is some of the programmatic assessment of learning. So I'm going to ask if Mary Pat could be there for the Leap Up and Jen to talk about some of our student survey work that we've done, and people who want to talk about the assessment piece of student learning. Table 4 is figuring out how to write the course level objectives or kind of the unpacking of the core concepts. And this is really relating to helping inform Dee's work with HAPS on writing the learning objectives and the HAPS exam for physiology only, if you're interested in that. Table 5, Patrick, we're going to have you be at your table there and talk about just a little bit what you did. Patrick has a poster, so if you miss his table today, you can talk to him at his poster tomorrow. But he was really inspired by last year's work and did some great stuff with his course about how to actually do this, and it relates to Michelle, to your question too. Table 6 will be brainstorming with Claudia about how to coordinate among courses. So she just showed you this thing she gave to her whole department by, physio 300, 400, whatever courses, and how in the world are we going to figure this out? Who's teaching what where and at what level? Can we actually figure out where is that concept introduced? Where is it practiced? Where is it mastered? Do we get to mastery of all of those concepts? How do we work through that thought process? And then table 7, if people want to brainstorm, we have Jim and Lisa over there to this is really relating to our guidelines as PMIG and writing this. So, relating to, are there really 5 concepts that define physiology, and is that common among the different subspecialties? Because we showed a slide earlier that said, most of us are doing human or systems level stuff, but we want to really be inclusive of those who are in ex-phys or animal phys departments as well. So how are those different? What kind of questions do we need to ask? What kind of things do we need to think about? Is an MD versus a PT different in their track? Pre-med, pre-PT? Do they need different stuff? So if you want to kind of brainstorm with that would be great. And at the tables, what we would ask you to write into the Google Doc is, share ideas amongst your table. Maybe you're already doing great stuff in your program. Share with the group what you're doing so we can capture that. Do you know any great resources available? Hey, actually, that paper by McFarland was really good. Let's add that to the resource list on the PMIG website. So share ideas of resources that you're using or you're aware of. What do you need in order to do these things in your department? What are the problems? And really, how can PMIG help? Post things on the website, make rubrics, get trained as Pulse ambassadors. How does PMIG help with any of these? So if you could collect some of these thoughts, that would be great. And we'll ask you to report back to the group on these things. The Google Doc will be available to everyone, so you can see everyone's notes as well. We want to be really transparent and share with that. But we're actually going to take 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes at the tables, and then we'll have a report out period. I'll give you a 5-minute warning that to wrap up the discussion and get notes. But so first thing is pick your table. Second thing is find them. Number 1 starts in the back. Get someone at your table that can find that Google Doc to record your notes, and enjoy the conversation. All right. So in the spirit of beer, beer. In the spirit of getting to Gentle Ben's Brewery, beer turned a lot of heads. So in the spirit of getting there for dinner, where we can definitely continue discussions, I'm going to just call things back together. And I'm smiling so big because it's great to see the energy just keep going and going, right? Like people have a lot of things to talk about, a lot of things to share. And it was like this at the last meeting too, where people just continued the discussions for an extra half an hour, and then into dinner. So we will do a quick report out period here, knowing that we'll have obviously time at the reception and dinner to talk more. In the morning, we have a 45-minute discussion period again, where we can continue having some of these types of interactions. So we'll have more time certainly to do this tomorrow. So we have about a half an hour until we're needing to take off to go over to dinner. So with the tables that we have, I figured what we could do is I'll set a little 5-minute timer. And if you guys could share from your table what you guys talked about and take a few questions, 5 minutes each will give us 30 minutes, and that'll get us out the door in time for dinner. So I've handed over a mic to Jeff for table 1. And table 1 was looking at departmental structure, reviewing of programs, and I know these conversations often steer off in different directions, so that's also okay. Val is going to try to capture some of the notes and comments. If you haven't already captured some of these on the Google Doc, we would ask that you do put some of your thoughts down there too. But Jeff, if you want to talk to us about what you guys discussed, that would be great.
I'll try to summarize as best I can. We mostly talked about departmental structures and review of programs. We didn't get anything to assessment and internal and external review processes. So I thought we had a really good discussion about where things are going in terms of medical schools and integrating those into undergraduate structures. The bottom line is basic science departments in medical schools are changing. We've talked about that. And that's, as Ron has stated earlier, that's creating a tremendous opportunity for undergraduate basic science education and taking advantage of these changes in the medical school programs. And Ron has correctly said the AAMC has basically taken away from medical school faculty and medical school departments, has taken away all kinds of control of their teaching of their disciplines: physiology, pharmacology, pathology, anatomy, neuroscience, etc. So the question then becomes, how do you organize within your own structure, within your own infrastructure, to teach these concepts and these subjects within a life science department instead of in a discipline specific way. In Toronto, medical schools, basic sciences are taught by clinicians only. So the basic science faculty teach the undergraduates. And we talked about those. In Australia and Monash, it was very interesting because we had a great discussion here that was very internationally driven. In Australia, they've kind of moved the other direction and moved more toward moving from the teaching the undergraduates, those faculty teaching more in the medical school departments and finding some sort of halfway medium. So the question becomes, so what is a physiology department supposed to look like? And how are you going to build that around a curriculum that is going to fulfill the needs of medical students, future medical students, dental students, vet students, PA students, PT, etc. And from that, as Ron has pointed out, they've developed a very strong physiology major at Arizona, and Randy talked a little bit about how to build that into a place like in West Virginia to meet their kinds of needs. And Andy's talking about how you're going to build that in a place where you have a very small medical school, but yet you're building a biomedical sciences department. So the bottom line becomes money. Who gets the money? And as Ron correctly pointed out, at Arizona, they get some. The dean gets more. So you take what you get and you do what you can. But as Ron pointed out at Arizona, they had developed this infrastructure within the physiology department over a long period of time. Michigan State's been doing it for a long time. I know Oregon's been doing it for a long time. Some other schools here, I know at Texas, you're getting into that realm at this point in time with a new medical school.
UCLA.
Yeah, UCLA has had a program for a long time. So, you now get to a point where you have large physiology courses that are servicing multiple majors. I think Ron, talked about biomedical engineering, pharmacology majors, physiology majors, a broad spectrum of student neuroscience majors because they have a neuroscience major, a broad spectrum. So rather than taking this on as a problem within your department, and within your discipline, you should turn this into an opportunity to build your program and curriculum as it fits your university and how it's going to best facilitate the department and your faculty. And once again, I want to emphasize the bottom line is money, right, Nick?
Thank you.
4 minutes and 40 seconds.
Okay, you must have typed a lot too. You had a lot there. So we were discussing mental models and how students learn core concepts from mental models. So we had a lot of agreement on their utility. We began by discussing an example of a mental model that could describe the distinction between equilibrium and homeostasis, and that we agreed that students often had misconceptions about these two ideas, and that an accurate model could help with that. We also talked about other mental models that included examining body temperature and its relationship to equilibrium. So if somebody suddenly dies and you see how their temperature changes, are they approaching equilibrium or homeostasis? And so that obviously then brought up the idea that non-equilibrium states can be mechanisms for storing energy. And so we had discussions about challenging mental models that could be wrong and challenging students' misconceptions through mental models that they might have been carrying for some time. We also agreed that it's important to be explicit about the components of the concept that you're describing, that the mental model has to be clarified to indicate how it actually describes the particular concept. We also wondered whether, especially since we each rely on what students learned in the courses that they took before they got to our course, is a particular course concept identified? Somebody's typing and my type's going away. Where did that go? Okay. Is the core concept identified as materials are covered in a course? In other words, somebody might be describing an example that satisfied a core concept, but if they don't identify that as a core concept, that might not carry through very well to the next course. So we talked about the challenge of knowing what our colleagues are covering in the precursor courses. We also talked about whether students recognize when they've seen a core concept before that they've learned in either a previous course or a previous example. So we were saying how success could be described by a student being able to apply a learned core concept to a new situation, such as if you taught them about how valvular function works on the left side of the heart, could they then say if you had dysfunction on the right side of the heart, what impact might that have in the cardiovascular system? And so that got us around to a curriculum discussion about this. In other words, can you have a shared vision that this is an effective approach to teaching by focusing on the core concepts, and that whether it's departmental wide or flipping your classroom or some new approach, that it's important to proceed to change an approach to conceptual learning with some rationale for why you're taking that approach.
Summarize. Very good.
Thanks.
All right, so we talked about program assessment, and in
in the list there, it said core concepts, but we kind of expanded and went off on a tangent. And we started by talking, well, are we talking about program assessment at the end, for example, on the exit survey, or are we thinking about program assessment very broadly? And that's the approach that we decided to take as we discuss program assessment. One note that I have, one thing that's important, what faculty teach assessment via self-reflection versus what students recognize they are learning. It could be that we teach it, but if you ask students, did you learn this? They might not recognize, maybe you use different words and they're paying attention to the words and not the meaning. Not that your students would ever do that, but perhaps that's something that's going on. The next thing we did was go around the table. What are we currently doing to take a look at programmatic assessment? And there were actually some really good ideas. I forgot your name. Dan, sorry. So, what Deanne does is a pre and post course evaluation of student work. They would do some work at the beginning of the semester, do some work at the end of the semester, and then those were given to someone else who's not teaching the course to be assessed. And that feedback to the instructor might help provide some insights into how the students are learning. And on top of that, there is some sharing of these assignments across departments. So it's not even faculty within your department, but maybe you're sharing with other departments on campus as well. Then after that, there was the question, well, why are we doing these assessments in the first place? So, that's always a good question to ask. One response, value added, or the ability to quantify value added as a recruitment tool for prospective students. Accreditation also came into play. Faculty reflection to improve the teaching. And then conversations then we had conversations about the departmental review process, both internal and external. Sometimes that's really the only thing driving people in the department to work together to assess what's actually being taught at the programmatic level. And then I have in all bold, lots of talk about student course evaluations. When we think about assessment, because that's kind of important, we can talk all about that at dinner if you are all interested. We also came up with a list of some potential assessments. The biomaps different than the phys maps. Also bio skills and assessment of competencies, not just content knowledge. Leap Up. We also talked about the fact that there's still some faculty resistance to assessment. And one strategy would be to ask for faculty to assess how they're doing. Maybe that request comes from the curricular committee and not you as the individual. Maybe that would be a little bit more helpful. How PMIG can help: share resources, develop the resources, share the resources, and most importantly, community building.
Where's table 4?
So the best part of my involvement, I had Dee as a captive audience, and it was great. So we dealt with writing course level objectives. So number one, what are we currently doing? I think Dee and I agreed that most courses do have course objectives. Sometimes they're very broad, however, and not very granular. So students will tell us sometimes, I studied all the objectives, but I didn't do well on the exam. And then you go and see what they did for the course objectives, and you find out in some cases they were pretty cursory. So sometimes the course objectives are not specific enough for the students to do well on the material that we're trying to get across. There probably should be student learning objectives, but course objectives at different levels for our classes. Like Arizona has like 15 physiology classes, and presumably there are different levels of classes and different objectives for the course. Number two, what resources are available? There's a lot of them. The HAPS course learning objectives, the American Physiological Society has been around for a long time, and I think all of us look at those from time to time. A lot of other programs have student course objectives that we can evaluate and modify. The Society for Biochemistry also has student course learning objectives for Texas. Of course, you're involved in biochemistry, so that would be important to you. Number three, what do we need? What do you need? We probably need more faculty, none of us, of course, but more of our colleagues that aren't here to maybe take course learning objectives a little bit more seriously. I, for one, have been involved in curricular design for a long time, and I can remember the days where I thought a course learning objective to understand such and such was good enough, but no, it's got to be a little bit more active, so we all have more to learn on that. Dee's idea maybe was to work backwards on some of the core concepts in our classes and develop the course learning objectives from the concepts that you worked through during the entire class, not at the beginning. Another idea we had is, and I've done it periodically, but not all the time, and that is tie in our course learning objectives with the exam questions specifically, so students know, where did you get that question? Well, objective number 97. And what can PMIG do? We think sharing the course learning objectives, which obviously is being done on the American Physiological Society, but all of us probably could share what we're doing in our various classes in terms of the active course learning objectives. Anything else? Dee?
I think that's good.
Okay, our table's topic was building a course around core concepts, and I think a more appropriate title for this would be building core concepts into a course that already exists and several other faculty also teach, so you can't change it too much. And just to echo what they said previously, I'm a big proponent of learning objectives. I use them on a chapter basis. I use them on a daily basis in my classes. So the core concepts really spoke to me when I came to the meeting last year, and I was really energetic and enthused to integrate it in my course. And then, I realized how much work that would be. So I'll just give you an example of what I did last year of trying to take the first step into integrating these core concepts into an undergraduate AMP, and it was really mostly just physiology lecture class. So 2 semesters, AMP 1, AMP 2, lecture-based, lab is separate. And what I did is I ended up introducing my students to the idea of these big concepts, these big topics, and trying to get them to think back, think from a broad perspective as opposed to just really worry about details. So I emphasized it daily in my lectures, created worksheets for them that instead of was going back over details, it was saying, well, how did we talk about homeostasis, or did we talk about cell-cell communication in this chapter or in, yesterday's lecture, et cetera. So trying to get them to think big picture wise. And then at the end of the semester, and none of this was mandatory, it was all optional because I just couldn't integrate it in the course in that manner at the time. And then at the end of the semester, I asked feedback from the students who utilize the core concepts regularly. But some things that we talked about at our table, so that's an idea of what I was currently doing. Resources that are available, obviously, was the meeting, the PMIG group, and the book, the core concepts book, was a really helpful guide for me and can be to instructors who want to integrate the core concepts in their classroom. So resources, what do we need? I think one thing that was echoed at our table is that, so this is obviously a challenge to try to redesign a course. A comment was made. It's always that feeling of you have to add stuff in as opposed to take stuff out. And, so the challenges are, how do we back off on content to promote core concepts? So what do we need? Examples from other faculty who effectively reduce content that would give new or inexperienced faculty helpful hints and guidelines for trying to integrate this into build this into a new course. Let's see. So PMIG can be a very useful resource for that. Let's see. how can PMIG help? Was there anything else?
Well, we said if people tried it, could they post what they did and how?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think the common ground here is that no one knows really how to do this or how to effectively do this. So we need people to just talk to each other and bounce ideas back and forth between each other. So that's what I did for this meeting. I have a poster, and I didn't do it because I'm proud of what I did. I did it because I needed help and I needed feedback from other instructors. So.
No, I thought that was really, really good, and we had a great suggestion. I thought and you already mentioned, but I think a more specific sort of almost like a lesson plan, a before and after. Like before you redesigned your course, this was my lesson plan, and now that I have core concepts in it, here's what it looks like. Because I think, not all of us are master teachers. Not all of us know exactly how to do that, and I think we want to, and we want to. It's just like hard to imagine it and hard to think how to do it. And especially I think for me, we have team taught courses. We have pairs of faculty. So it's not just you. You have to convince someone else to come along on this journey. So I think that's an additional challenge, but you have to have a clear vision to be able to convince someone else. And if you don't, then it's not going to happen. So, yeah.
If I could just add a comment. It's interesting that we are talking about, and it's intuitive for us that students learn on a progression, and we start with an introductory course and we build on complexity with our students across years, but we don't give ourselves the same permission to do that in our development. So I think you've just done Core Concept Integration 101, and next year you'll do 202, and next year and so on. But if we give ourselves the permission to have it be iterative, it really in the long term this is the process that takes time.
I did a 2-day workshop on course designing at my university at Gonzaga, and I have a book that we use, and it's really helpful by an instructor at University of Oklahoma. But it was exactly what you said. They emphasized that you can't just redesign a course in 1 year. You have to give yourself the expectation of do this in 2, 3, 4 years. You have to slowly implement it, see what works, what doesn't work, over time.
All right, so I had no takers for my table, and I figured it's because we already had the discussion as a group, but I wanted, since I was listed there. I know. So I'll go to you next, but I was table 6. So I'm in order. Yeah. So I just wanted to just ask, because at the end of that discussion, I didn't pose the question of do we want to do this, and if any of you would like to do this, can you talk to me so that we can put this together and collect that data? I know it may not be feasible everywhere, so if it is for you and you're willing to take it on, just talk to me. I'd love to kind of coordinate that and move it forward. Okay. Thank you. Table 7.
That's not the case. All right. So we had the idea kind of started about talking about different disciplines, and that, like others, led in a variety of directions. But we spoke a lot about how we all agreed that physiology, sometimes it's difficult to address the question, Erica, you brought up, of what are we doing that's unique, because we felt like the cool thing that excites us about physiology is that it does draw upon so many different disciplines, and that often we found ourselves describing physiology more almost as a way of thinking than as a specific singular concept or discipline, and that we felt almost like we needed a concept to cover the concepts, that physiology is concept based, and that is what we really felt like could be our point, and that then does go across different specialties, such as medicine, PT, etc., but that it can be hard to find those crossover points at times, and particularly maybe to relate them then to the specific core concepts that we've already talked about a lot. We talked about how assessment and aligning our assessment with what we're teaching is really important. So from the standpoint of what do we need, or how can PMIG help? One thing we did discuss was if having sort of a test bank of questions would be helpful that are not just tagged with core concepts, but also with different disciplines, so that if I'm looking for a really good way to use a multiple choice question to test students' understanding of information flow, and I know that I have a class that's mostly physical therapy, aspiring physical therapists, what's a resource that I could draw from to really do that well. So that identifying how physiology cuts across disciplines is the challenge. The simple question of, are the core concepts different? We felt like they're not really. And that when we talked about which were ranked highly, that the scientific reasoning, we were somewhat surprised it didn't rank higher, but then we said, well, maybe it's because all of us did duh. Of course that's important, so it's not even like worthy of saying it's important because we're all scientists. So how do we be explicit about those general principles, and that physiology does lie at that intersection of a variety of disciplines that then can also lead to a variety of professional careers or aspirations. Am I missing anything, guys? And that the comparative physiology shouldn't be overlooked, because we were talking a little bit also about how, perturbing the normal system, either through taking it out of a human and putting it into an animal, or creating some sort of a fictional example and scenario, can help us to maybe try to identify those core concepts that can cut across the different disciplines, rather than staying sort of in the lane of what we might normally think about, and that can help our students think more on a conceptual basis, and then we can test on a more conceptual basis as well.
The research.
Oh yeah, and so we were saying, like, there was a recent paper published in Advances on the fictional animal project, where they had to design an animal that utilized, the digestive system of something and the nervous system of something else, and so there's creative ways potentially to promote that more conceptual based learning, or to test that, because we talked a lot about that's one of the challenges of incorporating it.